Good evening and welcome to In Focus. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's reaction to the New Orleans attack raises questions about his strategy for crime and immigration. Meanwhile, Israel continued to violate the ceasefire in Lebanon as occupation forces advance along the blue line. In the Russo-Ukrainian war, Ukraine has stopped the flow of Russian gas through its territory following the expiration of the transit agreement between the two countries, meaning Russian gas will not flow through the Ukrainian soil or rather from Ukraine to Europe. Let's start with Trump's statements. Now, following the attack in New Orleans, President-elect Donald Trump said on social media that he was right about fearing criminals on the other side of the borders. The New York Times reported that Trump falsely suggested on social media that his condemnations of undocumented immigrants had been validated. Trump added that the crime rate in the U.S. is at a level that nobody has ever seen before. Legal immigration was a central feature of Trump's presidential campaign, where he promised the largest mass deportation efforts in U.S. history once he takes office. And for more analysis, we're joined from California by Dr. Ashraf Singer, an international politics expert. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Qnews.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Mr. Singer, Trump has linked the hit and run in New Orleans to his stance on immigration, suggesting that criminals crossing the border are a significant threat to the U.S. security. Now, how do you assess, or what's your take about this connection, and especially now that the suspect has been identified as a U.S.-born citizen?
It seems to me that Trump missed the explanation of this accident. Why he was fooling, that movement of MAGA to warn about, the border security, illegal immigrants in the United States, the number of crimes. But on the reality, the situation is different. This is why FBI, and local enforcement, they were waiting, to get more information about what was happening in New Orleans and Las Vegas, Trump, hotel. Both of them, they are U.S. veterans. These guys were not, illegal immigrant. They are not legal immigrant. They are the U.S. citizen, and unfortunately, they are U.S. veterans, Army veterans. This is really disaster. That Trump, in his explanation, he missed the right point, and this is why many people, they are and were asking here in the United States why Trump, really misleading, the media, misleading the public opinion of saying, this is because of the problem of the Democratic Party, problem of Biden administration. No, it's already the problem of the people. If the two guys were adopting, ISIS or Daesh, adopting, that kind of the terror act against innocent people. It seems to me Trump is wrong, and this is not really helping his campaign of showing, any story or stereotypes about the legal or illegal immigrants in the U.S.
Yes, Dr. Ashraf, you mean here that he jumped into conclusion without waiting for investigation to reveal what really took place, right?
Right, 100%. You are correct, yes.
Right. Trump has said that the crime rate in the US is at all-time high, and that his administration will fully support New Orleans in the aftermath of the attack. Now, what do you think of his rhetoric regarding crime at large in America?
Yeah, this is a good point, but we need really to rely on statistical figures before to jump to the conclusion. In other words, the number of crimes in the U.S. Committed by the U.S. citizen, the highest rate, uh, of crimes committed by the U.S. citizen, not by the illegal immigrant or legal immigrant in the United States. This is, what the statistics said about that. So it seems to me it's still a political statement in terms of using, this kind of story about MAGA, a perspective or MAGA advertising to convince, the most of the Americans they have to, raise that flag and showing their support to Trump statement or Trump campaign to fight the illegal immigrant and legal immigrant. I'm okay with his fight legal immigrant. Everybody should enter the United States should be legal, not really crossing the borders without even paperwork or the authority needs really to check his or her background and just to fight terrorism. I completely understand this point, the standpoint of Trump, but trying to convince public opinion by something wrong
Yes,
will work against them.
Very clear, Dr. Singer. We're speaking here about identifying and verifying the origins and the amounts of who enters the U.S. Now, given the suspect in this attack is a U.S. citizen and not an immigrant, how might this impact Trump's narrative about the link between immigration and crime? And do you think he will modify his position moving forward?
100% in terms of his position also about the H1 visa, where MAGA completely against, to bring, the skilled foreign workers to the U.S. And basically he accepted that with that kind of energy or that kind of statement by Elon Musk. And this is a big gap. The second gap now with Trump, that his interpretation about the terror attack occurred in Las Vegas and Louisiana. So Trump needs to really to revise his statement clearly that he can really convince the public opinion. But because Americans, they are unaware. Readings, the news, they are really watching what is going on. So it seems to me like Trump, he did a big mistake in that statement, and probably this is what reduced his credibility before January 2020. So I think Trump gonna to revise this statement because probably he.
You think he will modify his stance, or?
Yes. 100%, because this guy is the U.S. veteran, so Army veteran, so
right.
So he can't really hide this information. Particularly, the FBI was announced clearly that these guys, they have that link with ISIS or Daesh in their ideology.
Remy,
this is very dangerous.
Definitely. That was Dr. Ashraf Singer, international politics expert, joining us from California. We thank you so much for the fruitful insights here. Now, let's shift to the recent developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
الوضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Amidst the ongoing ceasefire in Lebanon, Israeli forces backed by Merkava tanks, military vehicles and a bulldozer have advanced into the outskirts of Beit Leif in southern Lebanon in the latest violation of the ceasefire agreement. According to the Lebanese media, Israeli forces searched some homes in the town which were subjected to Israeli artillery shelling. Israeli drones also targeted the outskirts of Yatir town in southern Lebanon twice. This marks the first time that Israeli forces have advanced towards the town since the ceasefire deal with Lebanon came into force on November 27th. And for more analysis, we're joined from London by Mr. Ammar Waqqaf, international politics expert. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Qnews.
Good evening to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Waqqaf, Israel has announced plans to redeploy and strengthen its military presence along the Lebanese borders. Now, what do you think are here the main objectives behind such a move?
Well, what we can see is that Israel is withdrawing its forces from some parts of Lebanon. We understand that there has been a third withdrawal before the advancing Lebanese army, who's taking sorts of deployments. This time around, it was in Naqoura, which is on the western sector or the western tip, the southernmost western tip of Lebanon. Equally, they moved some tanks, as you rightly said, to Beit Leif, so they're continuing to search, attack there. It hasn't been a real ceasefire. But I think they're reinforcing their forces along the Lebanese border because we've heard some Lebanese MP or as a spokesperson yesterday saying that the Hezbollah is monitoring the situation and they're going to decide at the end of the 60 days, which should be around 3 or 3.5 weeks from now, whether the ceasefire has endured enough or not. And if not, then the Hezbollah militia would take matters into their own hands, providing that or assuming that there would be still Israeli forces inside Lebanon. So they're waiting to see whether this ceasefire of 60 days has ended up with all Israeli forces withdrawing to the Israeli side of the border. And probably the Israelis are thinking there might be some resumption to the hostilities.
Well, Mr. Ammar, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem recently emphasized the growing strength of the resistance in Lebanon. Now, how might Hezbollah respond, from your point of view, to Israel's military build-up along the Blue Line?
Just like it did before they entered Lebanon a few months back. And look, Hezbollah's strength is, we think it's still there. There hasn't, but yeah, there's been a lot of talk about demolishing its ability to launch rockets and so on, but we haven't really seen that. What we saw is continuation of rocket launching, about 200 rockets a day, different distances, some of them really reaching as far south as Tel Aviv, and also the Israeli army finding it really, really difficult to have meaningful incursions in the south of Lebanon. And so should hostilities reignite, then we shouldn't expect anything less than that. In fact, we would be under there would be some 2 months of re-preparation, licking their wounds, reorganization, especially after the entire leadership had been decapitated by Israel. So we could probably presume that the Hezbollah would come even stronger should hostilities resume, that is.
Then how do you evaluate statements by the Israeli side about remaining in Lebanon after the end of the 60-day truce, which definitely violates the ceasefire agreement?
I think what the Israelis are looking for at this moment in time is some guarantees that their own population could go back to their houses and start rebuilding in the north of Palestine, Israel. And what they would want is to guarantee some sort of a meaningful truce or a long-term truce along the lines of UN resolution, Security Council resolution 1701, and which means that the Lebanese army would deploy at the border most points of southern Lebanon with Israel, and that Hezbollah would retreat back some of its forces. It may be in the interest of Hezbollah to do so, having lost a huge strategic ally as the previous Syrian government, and then the whole region is really in reshape at this moment in time. So it could be in their interest not to resume hostilities. Equally, though, it could be with the Israelis' interest to deal like a much bigger blow to Lebanon or Hezbollah in order to force Hezbollah to surrender its weapons and really take into consideration the or influence the dynamics inside Lebanon, which we would see within a few days' time with the
You mean here that they would
re-election.
you mean here that they would rearrange their own strategies?
It would depend, for example, on on the 9th of January, the Lebanese parliament is to sit and elect, try to elect a new Lebanese president. Should the outcome doesn't feel attractive enough to the Israelis, they might want to do something on the ground to force the Lebanese hand. If there is like a regional agreement, the Saudis, for example, managed to influence the result, and Hezbollah plays ball with some guarantees, because the last thing they would need is a Lebanese president who would stab them in the back, as the previous Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah put it one day.
Right, that was Ms. Amar Waqaf, international politics expert, joining us from London. We thank you so much for your insights here. And now let's move to the recent developments in the Russo-Ukraine war. The flow of natural gas through a major pipeline from Russia to Europe was cut off after Ukraine refused to renew an agreement that allowed the transit of Russian gas through its territory. According to the New York Times, the move to suspend the flow of gas through a pipeline that carried Russian gas to Europe for a decade is part of a broader campaign by Ukraine and its Western allies to undermine Moscow's ability to fund its war effort and to limit the Kremlin's ability to use energy as leverage in Europe. While the move could substantially reduce Russia's revenue from gas sales, it also carries risks for Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had warned for months that he would not renew the pre-war contract, which expired December 31st because of Russia's military operations. Well, and for more analysis, we're joined from Moscow by Ms. Amar Qnews, expert in Russian affairs. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Qnews. And Ms. Qnews, with Ukraine's decision to halt the flow of Russian gas after the expiration of the transit agreement, what impact do you foresee this having on both Europe energy markets and definitely Russia's economy?
Greetings to you once again. I think this is considered a hit to the European system that will be deprived from the cheap Russian gas, such as Slovakia and Hungary and Austria and other countries. This issue, I think, that it is within the American pressure upon Russia and Europe in the same time, with respect to the Russian losses, wouldn't be hard and harsh and wouldn't be affected the macroeconomics in Russia. Take noticed that there is a continuous growth and that the direction of recession in the Western economies, and the Russian gas is a great factor of the process of industry and production in the Western Europe. Therefore, this step would affect negatively upon Ukraine economically, as loses $1 billion and gains and a hostile state by Europe, in particularly the Eastern Europe, after we've heard threats and statements by Slovakia to cut off electricity, the pipeline Ukraine. So the issue that has two parts, the economic part that the Western countries will suffer, and secondly, politically, which is in a preemptive stage by Trump and a bid to find this majestic solution by pressing in Ukraine. But now, through his statements around the roadmap, isn't go inconsistent with Russia. As the economic situation is deteriorating in Europe, and as everybody knows, and there is a prediction by approaching a very harsh winter in that year, and would form a dilemma that forces him to buy the gas, the American gas, as we've seen in the market, that there is a tangible increase of as a result of the Ukrainian move.
Right. From your point of view, given the expiration of the transit agreement, how might this escalation affect the broader dynamics of the Russian-Ukrainian war, especially in terms of energy and the geopolitical tensions in Europe?
Today, that the challenges and escalation is the future of this situation today. We've had talked previously about the Western system, and now we see coalitions have been formed and divisions. For instance, the Anglo-Saxon group or bloc and the Eastern Europe, such as Germany and France, and the Eastern Europe leading by Poland. And now we have seen this division, and with respect militarily, we found that the Ukrainian fronts were collapsed after the free anti-confrontation collapse, supported by the Western militarily and financially. And we are at the last moment, or the final moments of this geopolitical conflict, and the Western system have lost at a whole, and the factor of time and the not to rely on the upcoming Trump administration.
Right.
Many of the outcomes would be formed, but now we are before a new stage of escalation as the American interests aren't going in line with the Russian interest.
Right.
We're talking about a ceasefire and not to pump the United States.
Right, we are
create
looking for a
some
ceasefire and a kind of peace negotiations, particularly at this very critical stage. The whole world is passing by, and definitely Ukraine, the Ukrainian-Russian is one of the biggest problems that are hindering the world progress. That was from Moscow by Mr. Ammar Qana, expert in Russian affairs. Many thanks for your insights, and I guess that brings us to the end of this episode of In Focus. Many thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.